chosen ones. If you grew up hearing your sibling's name used as the standard you could never quite reach, if the words "why cannot you be more like them" were the soundtrack of your childhood, this message will reframe everything that comparison quietly stole from you. By the end, you will understand why the very wound that made you feel less was actually the hand that was shaping you for more. Stay with me. Before you go any further, I want you to pause. Think back, not to one specific memory, but to the feeling. That feeling of standing in a room where someone else took up all the light. That feeling of working harder, reaching further, and still falling short of a name that was not even yours. That feeling of wondering, in the quietest corners of your own mind, whether you were simply born into the wrong role, whether you were the placeholder, while someone else was the real thing. I know that feeling, and I know how many years you have carried it without anyone naming it correctly. This message is the naming. The God who knit you together, who assigned you your particular face, and your particular family, and your particular place in that birth order, did not make an error. The universe that positioned you as the one who was measured, compared, and found wanting by someone who should have simply loved you. That positioning was not an accident. It was an assignment. And I know that may sound almost offensive right now, especially if you are still in the middle of the ache. But stay with me, because what I am about to show you goes deeper than comfort. It reaches all the way down to the architecture of who you are. Here is what nobody told you. The child who is constantly compared is the child who is being forged. Not broken, forged. And those two things can feel identical from the inside, but they produce entirely different outcomes. One leaves you fragmented, the other leaves you steel. And slowly, quietly, in ways you have not yet given yourself permission to fully acknowledge, you have been becoming steel. There are 3 signs that prove this is already true in you, and the third one is the one that will shift something you have been carrying for a very long time. Let us begin with something most people never do. Let us look clearly at what comparison actually is, at its source. Because you may have spent years believing the comparison was about you, a judgment of your abilities, an honest assessment of your worth against your sibling's worth, as if someone conducted a fair evaluation and returned a verdict. But that is not what happened. That was never what happened. When a parent reaches for comparison as a parenting tool, they are not speaking from wisdom. They are speaking from anxiety, from their own unprocessed fear about whether they are doing enough, whether their children will make it, whether the family will be okay. Comparison is not a measurement of children. It is a spillage of parental fear onto the nearest available surface. And you were that surface. A confident, secure person does not need to rank the people they love. Only a person operating from scarcity, from the belief that success is limited, that only one person in a family can rise. Only that person turns love into a competition. Your parents were not measuring you. They were revealing themselves. Their comparisons said nothing true about your ceiling. They said everything about the walls they had built inside their own understanding of what was possible. That is not an excuse for the damage it caused, but it changes everything about whose story it actually was. It was never your story, it was theirs. And you have been living inside someone else's story for long enough. Let me give you a real example. There was a man I knew, the middle child in a family of 3. His older brother was athletic and magnetic. His younger sister was artistic and beloved. He was, by the family's unspoken consensus, the unremarkable one. He spent his 20s feeling like a footnote in his own life. Then he built a business. It failed. He built another. It struggled. He built a third, and something took hold. When someone asked what gave him his edge, he was quiet before he answered. He said, "I am not afraid of not being the best in the room. I learned very young that I could keep going, even when I was not being celebrated." Most people fold when they stop receiving praise. I never needed praise to continue. I only ever needed to keep moving. That was not a personality trait he was born with. That was a skill, forged in the exact fire he had spent decades wishing had never burned him. The first sign that you are a chosen one, who was prepared through comparison, is this: you do not need external validation to take action. Sit with that for a moment, because it does not sound like much until you truly understand how rare it is. Most people are quietly governed by approval, not in obvious ways, but in the small daily movements of their lives. They are constantly checking whether what they said landed well, checking whether their choice will be respected. This checking is so habitual, so woven into how they move through the world, that they do not even recognize it as dependence. They just think it is being careful, being considerate. But there is a difference between genuine consideration and the compulsive need to be approved of before you can fully exist. Most people who grew up in affirming households, where love was steady and praise was given freely, never had to learn that difference. The approval was always there. They absorbed it without question. And because they never questioned it, they never had to develop what exists underneath it. You had to develop what exists underneath it. When the approval was withheld, when your achievement was met, not with celebration, but with a comparison. When your effort was met, not with acknowledgement, but with a raised bar. Something happened inside you, something slow and quiet and absolutely essential. You learned that approval from others was not a reliable foundation. You learned it could be moved, recalibrated, relocated to someone else's performance without warning. And so, out of pure necessity, you began to build something else, something inside yourself that external judgment could not reach. You began to develop an interior compass. You may experience it simply as a stubbornness, a quiet refusal to stop moving even when no one is watching. A way of deciding something and holding to it without needing a committee to agree. A comfort with uncertainty that people around you sometimes find unsettling, because most of them cannot function without consensus. And you can function without applause. This is not arrogance. This is self-authorship. Think about the decisions you have made that other people did not understand or support. The direction you chose that no one in your family validated. And think about the fact that you took it anyway. Not because you were reckless, but because something inside you knew, with a clarity you could not always explain, that it was yours to walk. That clarity was carved out of you through every moment of being told you were not enough. You quietly learned that enough was a standard you would have to define for yourself. The first sign is in you. The compass is already built. The second sign is this. You see people with an uncommon depth, not their performance, not their surface, the actual person underneath. This gift is so woven into how you naturally engage with others that you may not recognize it as exceptional. It may simply feel like paying attention, but most people do not pay attention the way you do. Most people see what someone presents. You see what someone conceals. Here is why. Growing up under comparison teaches a particular kind of perception. When you are constantly being measured against someone else, you become acutely aware of the machinery behind evaluation. You see, from the inside, how performance gets constructed, how a person learns to display their strengths and hide their insecurities, how someone can appear confident and be terrified underneath. You saw this not as an adult analyzing it intellectually, but as a child living it physically. And that early education in the gap between appearance and reality gave you an almost prophetic ability to read beneath the surface of people. You walk into a room and you know things. You know who is performing ease but feeling panic. You know who has something important to say but will not say it. You know who in your circle is struggling in a way they would never announce. Because you remember what it felt like to struggle in a way you could never announce. This is not just empathy. Empathy is feeling what someone feels. What you have is perception. You see the architecture of a person's interior experience from the outside. A particular flatness in someone's eyes when they say they are fine. A way someone deflects praise that signals not humility but self-erasure. You are likely the person others come to when they need to be truly seen. The one whose presence says, without words, I already know there is more to you than what you are showing, and I am not going anywhere. That is rare. That is leadership of the deepest kind, and it was born in the exact place you spent years wishing you could escape. The second sign is in you. Now here is the third sign, and this is the one that changes everything. The one that may unsettle you before it frees you. The sibling you were compared to was not the winner in that story. They were the other casualty. I want to say that again. The sibling who was held up as the standard, who seemed to receive the approval you were denied. They were not liberated by that position. They were imprisoned by it in a different cell. When a child is placed on a pedestal by comparison, something invisible but profound happens to them. They begin to understand that their worth is contingent on performance, that love is available as long as the standard is maintained, that they must keep achieving, keep being the reference point, or risk losing the position they have come to depend on for their sense of self. They become, quietly and without language for it, terrified of stopping, terrified of an average day, terrified of a failure that might reveal them as something other than what everyone decided they were. And many of them live that way for decades, performing, maintaining, running on a treadmill of expectation they did not build and cannot step off without feeling that something fundamental will collapse. You were never on that treadmill. You were pushed off it early, roughly, painfully. And that exit, as violent as it felt, was in some ways a kind of grace. You were forced to go looking for a different foundation. You were forced to ask questions about worth and identity that the praised sibling may never have had the pressure to ask. You were pushed toward authenticity by the very experience that seemed to deny it to you. The sibling, who was always the example, is still, in many cases, living for the example, still performing for an audience that no longer needs to be impressed. And you who were told you were behind, you have been building something real, something that does not require an audience to stand, something that belongs to no one's story but your own. This is not about triumph over them. They are not your competition. They never were. The advantage was yours, and it came disguised as loss. The third sign is not just in you. It is in the freedom you carry without even knowing you are carrying it. Now I want to address the place where most people get stuck, because everything I have said so far may have resonated, and yet there is still something that pulls back. A voice that says, but it still was not fair, but I still deserve better. But knowing this does not undo what it felt like. And you are right. It was not fair. You did deserve better. Nothing I say will retroactively fill the moments where you needed celebration and received comparison. Instead, that loss is real. It belongs to your story. Do not let anyone tell you to rush past it. But here is the truth that lives on the other side of that grief. Your worth was never inside the verdict. The family story about who was capable and who needed to try harder was made of words, of habits, of fear. It was not made of truth. And here is what is remarkable about you. Somewhere in you, even when you could not have articulated it, you knew that. You felt the wrongness of being reduced to a comparison. That feeling, that refusal to fully accept the verdict, was not defiance. It was your soul protecting its own truth. Your parents' comparisons were the misreadings of people who were themselves misread. They passed along a poverty of vision they had absorbed from their own families, their own unexamined fears. And you arrived at the end of a long line of that poverty, and something in you refused to continue it. That refusal is the beginning of the healing, and the healing only requires one thing. It requires you to stop organizing your present life around a verdict that was never true. Let me say that one more time, because it is the sentence this entire message has been building toward. Stop organizing your present life around a verdict that was never true. You are still, in small ways, doing this. Still deflecting praise a beat too quickly, because somewhere inside you learned that praise was unreliable. Still shrinking in rooms where someone appears more accomplished. Still working twice as hard to prove something that needs no proving. To an audience that stopped watching decades ago. These patterns are not your character. They are your conditioning. And the fact that you can see them clearly now, the fact that something in you recognized yourself in this message, is the signal that the conditioning is loosening. There is something else that needs to be named, because I have watched it stop too many chosen ones right at the edge of their own becoming. It is the guilt of surpassing. Many people who grew up being compared arrive at a point where they are doing well, and at that exact moment, a quiet shame appears about succeeding when the sibling is struggling. Pull to make yourself smaller, so the gap does not feel so large. This guilt is not love. I know it carries the texture of loyalty, but it is the residue of a scarcity framework you absorbed without choosing. Your success does not diminish your sibling. Your joy is not subtracted from their joy. When you step fully into your own life, you are not winning a race. They are still running. You are demonstrating that the race was never the point. So let the guilt rise when it rises. Just pause and ask yourself whose voice this is. Is this my truth? Or is this an echo from a room I no longer live in? Most of the time, when you trace it back, you will find it is an echo. And echoes do not command you. They only ask to be heard and released. You are allowed to thrive. I want to give you 3 specific practices to anchor what this message has begun. The first is this. For the next 7 days, every time someone acknowledges something you did, pay attention to your response. Are you accepting it, or are you minimizing it, qualifying it with a but? It was nothing or anyone could have done it. Notice the pattern without judgment. Simply see it clearly. Before you can change a reflex, you have to be able to watch it in motion. The act of witnessing your own deflection with honest attention begins to create a pause between the impulse and the action. And in that pause, choice becomes available. The second practice is to locate one area where you are still measuring yourself against your sibling and retire the measurement. Identify one specific arena where you are still quietly running the comparison in the background, and consciously choose to remove your sibling from that conversation. In that area, your only reference point is your own trajectory. Where were you a year ago? Where are you now? What does the next step look like in terms that have nothing to do with anyone else's position? This recalibration is disorienting at first, because the comparison has been a background constant for so long. It feels like orientation, but it is not orientation. It is distortion. The third practice, say something true about yourself once a day, Out loud, not an affirmation. Something real, specific, observed. I handled that difficult conversation without collapsing. I saw something no one else caught. I kept going today when I wanted to stop. Speak it aloud, even if you are alone. The child who was compared was also the child whose self-narration was written by others. This practice is the slow, deliberate act of writing your own narration. One small, true sentence at a time. Your story does not begin with who was better. It begins with what you chose to build in the aftermath of being told you were less. And you built something remarkable. You built an interior compass that does not require applause. You built a perception of people that sees past performance into truth. You built a freedom from the pedestal that the praised child never knew they needed. You built, out of the raw material of rejection, a form of self-knowledge that most people spend entire lifetimes trying to access. And you built it by surviving the family you were given and refusing, somewhere in the quiet core of yourself, to fully believe their verdict. That refusal was not bitterness. It was wisdom that knew, even without words, that you were more than the measurement you always were. And here is what changes now. Now you begin to live from that knowledge, rather than toward it, not striving to one day prove you were worth more, but inhabiting, daily, the truth that the proof was never the point. The point is the life, the full, complex, deeply felt, completely yours life, that was always waiting on the other side of the comparison's shadow. Step into that life. Not someday now, in the moment you catch the old reflex and set it down. In the moment you let praise land. In the moment you speak one true thing about who you are. You were not placed in your family by accident. You were positioned with a precision you are only now beginning to understand, not to be diminished, but to be made undeniable. The child who was told they were less becomes the adult who no longer needs anyone to tell them otherwise. Not because the wound healed completely, but because the wound became a foundation. Because the pain became a form of knowledge so deep that nothing shallow can shake it anymore. That is who you are becoming. That is who, in many ways, you already are. Pause right now and let that settle. You are not behind. You are arriving into yourself, fully, without apology. Without the need for a comparison to tell you where you stand. You know where you stand. You have always known. You are simply waiting for permission to stop pretending otherwise. The permission is yours. Take it. Thank you for staying with this message to the end. If this reached something real inside you, let me know by liking this video and sharing it with someone who has been carrying this particular weight. There are people in your life right now who have never had this named for them. You see who needs it. Trust that instinct, subscribe, and stay close. Because tomorrow, I am revealing the exact moment a chosen one stops performing for their family's story and begins building their own. I will show you what that turning point looks like, how to recognize it in your own life, and how to move through it without losing the relationships that matter. You will not want to miss it. Choose the video on your screen that calls to you most. I will see you there.